Welcome to the Connors Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. Uh, Obviously, this is an election year, and we've had a few candidates who've been running for city council in Brooklyn. Now we're going to shift to Queens, and welcome back to a good friend of the show, Marvin Jeffcoat. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you?
Okay, we're doing okay. So let me ask you now, where do you live? Where are you running for city council?
I live in Woodside, near St. Teresa's, between 50th and Laurel Hill, and I'm running in the 26th Council District, which encompasses Woodside, Sunnyside, Long Island City, and a little bit of Astoria.
Okay, now let me ask you something. Why, you know, you're pretty well established in your career. Why are you running for office? Why, why you, going out on the streets all the time and when you can stay at home with the kids?
It's a very good question, and my goal is to make things better for my kids. I want to bequeath to them what my parents gave to me, so that they inherit an America that's strong and robust, constitutionally sound. It's ironic that the young lady I'm running against, and I have nothing against her, she seems to be a nice, although misguided young lady. We left Korea around the same time during my first tour. I think she was around 8. And, after having served in Korea, going up to the DMZ and looking socialism straight in the face and staring it down to preserve her native land, I find it strange that she would try to import the ills of socialism into the United States. So, and yeah, I don't think she's a bad person, once again, but she's very misinformed. And I mean, she says things like, she, on the floor of the council, she said something to the effect of, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have the choice to abort my baby up until the last day. She said something to that effect. Now, how do you reconcile that with that child when that child has cognition and understands that the mother would have killed the child? I mean, those are the types of things that the socialists have worked on in our higher learning institutions and now the military, and they've totally brainwashed our youth, whether they be migrant youth, immigrant youth, or native born. They've totally brainwashed them against their own self-interest and America. And so my goal is to reinvigorate young folks with a sense of pride in America and let them know that, the issues that I'm talking about, they're not Republican and Democrat or Democrat. They're issues that mean something to them and that impact their life. So, to sum it up, I'm running to preserve the United States for my kids. And, Curtis said, don't move, improve. Well, one of the things I want to do before I do finally retire from actively working is to improve the city in which I was born in. I feel I owe it to the people coming up to leave them what was given to me.
Now, you mentioned when you were in service. Where were you in service, and how long were you in the military?
I spent 22 years in the Army. I started out in the reserves as a military policeman, which I understand you were a military policeman as well. And then I went in the regular Army, spent most of my time at Fort Bragg. But I started out in 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault, 3rd Ranger Battalion. I did some time at Benning as a basic airborne instructor and sniper instructor. And I went to Korea to the Long Range Surveillance Detachment, and then Fort Bragg deployed to Operation Desert Storm combat operations over in Iraq. And then back to Korea to the Long Range Surveillance Detachment as the ops sergeant instead of a team leader. And then back to Bragg as a squad leader, platoon sergeant, and jump master instructor. And then finally, I retired at Fort Drum as an observer controller trainer, exporting what we call a joint readiness training package to Guard and Reserve units. So, I ran the full gamut of military career. I have the law enforcement background as well as the counterinsurgency background. So, I know a little something about, one, order maintenance, but number two, how to check this Marxist-Leninist insurrection that's about to move from the low-intensity conflict phase, late incipient, into what I think is going to be a high-intensity conflict if we don't check it, because the middle of the country is not going to tolerate it well.
Yeah, now, you talked about abortion, and a number of times previous, Congressman Burgess Owen was on our show when he talked about Margaret Sanger, who was probably, up there with Hitler, and I'm not really exaggerating by much, as one of the worst racists in our history, but yet she's honored by Planned Parenthood. And I understand they're taking some of her statues and pictures down, but still, the idea was basically that we could control the African American population by aborting them. And for some reason, that doesn't seem to get across right now.
You bring up Margaret Sanger. She is a vile, evil person. And yes, Hitler learned a lot from her. But she picked up the Democrat Party mantle. It was formed in 1828 to promote slavery. And once they lost the Civil War, and slavery was going to end because in that form, because it was not productive. She helped the Democrats come up with their genocidal plan. And unfortunately, I think it's like a mass form of Stockholm syndrome amongst blacks, where they just don't see that in abortions, or in Queens, the highest abortion rate in Queens, I believe, in South Jamaica, which has the highest concentration of blacks in the borough. And it's sad, but we have a lot of blacks in my district as well. But it doesn't stop there. What they're doing now to the young, they think they've conquered blacks and Hispanics and other minorities. So what they're doing now is they're moving on to the young white male populace. And if they can imbue the young white male populace with self-hatred and gender identity confusion, if you think about that, they wipe out about 74%, maybe 70% of the fighting age male population. So it's a really malicious process, and it's well thought out. I think it has global implications because socialism is a global ill, and you have the global socialists that have infested the Democrat Party. Not that they had to work hard to do that. In the mid-'50s, the Communist Party USA, and there's no distinction between a socialist and communist, just the way they push the platform. But the head of the Communist Party USA said that we'll never have to run a candidate. The Democrats will do it for us. And unfortunately, Johnson was able to convince a lot of blacks that the Democrat Party was the party of civil rights, when up until that point, every piece of civil rights legislation had been crafted by Republicans and pushed forth by Republicans and fought staunchly by Democrats. Now, the problem with, this is a family show. I don't want to use the language Johnson used, but he used the N-word. He said, you give me this piece of civil rights legislation and we'll have that N-word vote forever. And it seems to be coming true through fruition, because it's hard for blacks not to vote Democrat. But, that process affects a lot of other minorities. I mean, you take your ethnic European Catholics, whether they be Irish, German, Italian, Polish, they're working class people, and they're told that the Democrat Party is the party of the working man. And the Soviets said that for years, and nothing could be further from the truth. They are the party of enslavement, whether that be through physical bondage, which is no longer profitable, or through renovations like they do with Native Americans, or housing projects. None of those things where the government gives and takes and controls your life is beneficial to us. But if you look at the way they've gone into our education system, they've managed to make fantasy reality. And so when people go to research things, what they come up with is that Republicans are bad and they're racist, and Democrats are nice and they give you free stuff. And as we know, nothing's ever free. Right. So, it's still a phenomenon that hurts the black community, but they have a different tool set for different ethnicities. And one of the things the socialists were good at is separating people by pedigree. Now, modernly they do it by gender, and that whole thing is sick. But if you look at the way the Soviet Union went after people by ethnicity, they would divide and conquer, because the Soviet Union wasn't one homogenous Russian state. They would go out and they would send the Mongols into White Russia and vice versa, and they would conquer that part of the army had a different ethnic makeup, and so they had no problem with being brutal toward the people that were in that particular region. And if they get full control of the United States, they will do that again here.
Now let me ask you,
socialism does.
this is radio, but can you describe your ethnic background for the listeners?
Yes, for the modern day listener, I am he, him, African American. For those of us with common sense, I'm a black Catholic heterosexual male, and that's going to drive them nuts.
Now you have kids. I mean, for your kids, what are the most important issues in a city council race in New York?
Well, I think one of the big ones is everything boils down to regulatory reform. And I don't want to get off on a tangent, but until we reform the way our government does business at the city, state, and federal level, where the legislative cedes its power to the executive and allows them to make rules and regulations that never pass constitutional debate on the floor of any chamber, we're always going to have problems. But one of the biggest problems plaguing us right now, besides crime, and that's huge, and we should get to that later, but when we talk about children, if they make it out of the womb and don't get murdered by abortionists, and they make it home from school, walking the streets or riding the subways, the other thing is that when they're in the classroom, they're being inculcated with ideology that runs afoul of their parents' religious beliefs and values, and it's detrimental to their health. I mean, in New York is sure to follow what New Jersey is doing. The state attorney general and the governor are suing local school districts. I wish we had these kind of school districts here in New York. We don't. That say if a child wants to change his gender, they have to notify the parents. New York City is the exact opposite. They want to do the exact opposite. So, you have this thing where they take our money and they fund abortion. They also take our money and they fund story time with a drag queen in public libraries. And I would imagine that stuff is going, that kind of, it's grooming. It's grooming children for pedophilia, whether it be homosexual or heterosexual. It's got to stop. So that's a huge problem. And the way we cure that is that we change the structure of the Board of Education so that you have the Board of Education on the ballot, on the Board of Elections ballot, the same as city council candidates, and you have a Board of Education in each borough, but also you let the money follow the child. We spend $26,000 a year to educate children. They can't read, write, do arithmetic, or know their civics. They don't know their basic rights. If we take that money and let that money follow the child, whether it be homeschooling, charter schools, vouchers, or even in a public school, but let the money follow the child. The parents make choices, and the teachers have to teach. They have to become competitive, and you cut out the middleman, the UFT, and take away their power base. The UFT they're sick. What's her name? Randy Weingarten. She's behind all this gender identity stuff in our schools, and she wanted the kids to stay home instead of going to school because, she could give her people a perk to generate revenue and dues money. But that has nothing to do with protecting our children. And children were being psychologically abused in schools, and we didn't know about it until COVID. So if there was anything good that came out of COVID, it was the realization that they're brainwashing our kids toward their own detriment. And that's how, that's how you have young women like Julie Wan, who came up in the school system and went to college and is brainwashed against a country that's given her so much. And again, I have nothing against this young lady, but she's just so misguided in all of her policies. So I think the biggest threat to our children right now is the miseducation, because they'll make bad decisions as adults and they'll be misled and they'll give up all their freedom.
Now, I know a lot of our clients are senior citizens, and I can tell you right now, the one thing that's on their mind probably more than anything else is crime. And the city council doesn't seem to put any pressure to, to reform bail or to do anything. And it seems like the city council, except for maybe about 8 or 9 people, is totally off in left field without a glove.
Well, what it is that they're Democrat socialists, and they want to increase the misery index so that they can control people. They want folks afraid and dependent on them. But, with cashless bail, I talked to the practitioners. The last 108th Precinct Council meeting, I asked the acting commander for the 108, what do you need? And he told me, more funds and more officers, which we all know that, but I figured I'd ask him. Now, my opponent, Julie Warren, she says, I'm not like the radicals like Tiffany Caban, but she is, because she voted, not only did she vote to defund the police department, she voted to shrink the class size so that you reduce the manpower. So if you think about it, that's akin to the abortion program. I have something I don't like, I eliminate it at the beginning. So that's how they go about creating the fear. But there's, the public safety issue is a lot broader than just the crime that's running rampant. And you and I know, as military policemen, order maintenance is the key. But when you go out and you make an arrest, and you make a good arrest, they have to be held. They have to be held on bail, and they have to be segregated from the population that they abuse. Rikers Island is the perfect place for that, and they want to close that and probably make luxury apartments. But the public safety issue goes well beyond the physical crime. That's what everybody sees, and that's what everybody's afraid of. But, you have things like asbestos in NYCHA housing. You have catch basins that are not being cleaned out. Now, we just recently had a storm almost 2 years ago that killed a lot of people in these illegal basements. The city council, along with my opponent, has done nothing to correct that. So if we have another storm, we're going to lose more people. That's a public safety issue. The 39th Avenue bike lane fiasco. They rerouted the bike lane. Fire department testified before the community board and said, don't do this because you'll increase my response time. They did it anyways. People are up in arms about that because the traffic pattern they created, all to appease the bike lane people that donate money along with the UFT to my opponent, is driving people nuts because the pattern is crazy, but it's also dangerous. You have your sidewalk cafes. They're huge rat harborages. And we talked about Rikers Island, but you have the mentally ill. A former coworker of mine, Nina Rothschild, from the Department of Health, was leaving the agency headquarters in Long Island City, and she was attacked with a hammer because cashless bail lets mentally ill people out to fester, and it's really a form of abuse for them because they're exposed to the elements. But what they should have are special units and special officers in Rikers Island that can deal with these kind of people, so that when they commit the crimes, you can't prosecute vagrancy. I get it, but all the crimes associated with it, murder, rape, robbery, assault, public defamation, public urination, all those things have to be prosecuted. And then now you have a reason to intervene. You bring the person in and you segregate them and you give them the mental health care that they need. You make it compulsory after an adjudicated process. But these people, they don't think about none of that. And to make it worse, they're taking away our right to self-defense. If you look at former Marine, Mr. Pettyman, now that they've taken away the police department's ability to go out and proactively prevent crime, now they're taking away our own self-defense. He was, by common law, he was well within his right. He didn't choke the guy. What he did was he put on a restraint, the same type of restraint that you and I were taught in MP school. I'd rather see a citizen or an officer put a restraint on someone. And unfortunately, yes, the guy lost consciousness and he passed away because he wasn't in the best of health. And he was combative. But I'd rather see a restraint applied than to have officers have no choice but to start punching people in the face, which is, I see a lot of that. I'm surprised that it's not being raised. But then what choice do they have? Pantaleon was a small guy against a giant, and he applied a restraint, which they called a chokehold. And, they took that away from the police. So now, instead of order maintenance, instead of subduing a subject, now you have to escalate to deadly force. And so that's wrong. And that brings me to qualified immunity. They've taken that away from cops and citizens. My opponent, she didn't say anything when Nina Rothschild was hitting the head with a hammer. But if an Asian or another ethnic minority is attacked or assaulted, she'll make a racial issue out of it. Well, I work with groups like Asian American Cohesion and the Guardian Angels, and along with qualified immunity for NYPD, I would give them some form of qualified immunity because they actually go out into the communities and they help to patrol their areas to make the streets safe, where the police, to supplement the police where there's gaps. The other thing is she also voted to take away the intelligence that NYPD gathered on known criminals. So, what that does is that makes life harder and more dangerous for police officers, and they're going to have to go back out into the street one day when we return to common sense and good order and discipline, and they're going to have to regain that intelligence that Julie Wan and Tiffany Caban and the rest of the socialists took away from the police department. And they made the police department expunge records of known criminals, and there's also a bill up in Albany to reinforce that. But what that's going to cause is one day when the city regains sanity, police are going to have to go back out into the street, gather that intelligence, and proactively enforce the law and bring some order maintenance. And that's going to create violent confrontation because the thug is not just going to he's not going to see the territory that he's taken already.
Now, we're running out of time, Marvin, but can you, to wrap it up, can you give us your website and where people can learn more about your campaign?
Absolutely. They can visit me at marvinjeffcoat.net, marvinjeffcoat.net, and any donation from $10 to $1,000 would help us to get the word out and defeat Julie Wan, the City Bike folks, and the UFT that want to bring pain and misery to our neighborhood. marvinjeffcoat.net. Thanks, Mike.
Marvin Jeffcoat, keep it up. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.